Navigating in a new environment can already be extremely difficult. But let me ask you this. Have you ever tried doing so with your eyes closed? Have you ever tried doing so with your ears covered? If you haven't, then you most likely don't know what it's like for someone who has to do that every day. I do, because that's what having disabilities is like. But let's make one thing clear. For anyone who's curious, I'll answer this now. Having disabilities does not always make you disabled. Do certain disabilities limit what you can do to a certain extent? Yes. Do certain disabilities make you disabled by a certain term? Yes. But, in a way, they also add more to your experience, and they help you learn to do things in different ways that other people don't know how to do in those ways. They know how to do the same thing, but not in the same way that someone with a disability now knows how to do. Living with disabilities is very difficult. It can be challenging, it can be rough, it can be taxing, and a lot of times it can be frustrating. I've lived with disabilities from pretty much as long as I can remember. I wasn't born with any of them, but they did end up happening over time. Around 2 years old, I ended up losing my sight, and years later, I ended up losing my hearing. Now, a lot of this happened because of pressure buildup in my head that we didn't know about when I was a kid until it was too late to completely save it. Pressure buildup from fluid behind my eyes took away my sight. It messed up my optic nerves, and because of that, I became visually impaired. So for people who know how to see, your question may be, do you remember having any sight? And to answer that question, I don't. Because if you know one thing about how memory works, especially when it comes to when you're a kid, a lot of times you're not always able to remember things from before 2 years old, which for me would have been when I did have sight. I don't remember that. I remember having to use a cane to get around and not being able to see the way other people can for as long as I can remember. In a way, I can say the same thing about hearing. Because of all the ear infections that I had as a kid and that I still sometimes get today, this has been my life for as long as I can remember. Was it a bit different before? Yeah. Because before I didn't have these hearing aids called Bahas, which are hearing aids that I don't think they are exactly like the ones from the movie Wonder, because I've never seen what they used in that movie, but they kind of work the same way. If you know anything about the character Augie Pullman from the movie Wonder, he has hearing aids, and they're on a headband. That's what these Bahas are. The only difference is these hearing aids don't go in my ear. They sit on the side of my head, and they work by connecting in a way I would say more to the inner ear. So for someone like me who's had a lot of wax buildup problems, thus also causing the ear infections, they kind of travel past all that. So if something happens where I have wax buildup and I can't hear because of it, if I put them on, I can hear again. If I take them off, it becomes a lot harder to hear without them. And again, this has been my life for as long as I can remember. Now, the one disability I was born with because of something known as Cruzon syndrome is the fact that I quite literally cannot smell. And I get this question a lot. If you can't smell, how can you taste? That's a question that to this day I still don't know how to answer. Because I can taste just fine. My taste has never been affected, which is honestly one of the reasons why I love food. But my smell, the way I like to describe it is if you spray something in the air and I breathe it in, or when I'm making hot chocolate and I breathe in the scent of, the thing being made or the thing in the air, like the fumes, I can taste the fumes. But if I try to smell it with my nose, even when my nose isn't all stuffed up, I can't smell it. And that's been my life for as long as I can remember. That's definitely made things difficult, yes, but it hasn't, for me, ever made anything impossible. And that's the one thing I want everyone to remember leaving this. That just because you have a disability does not mean that it's impossible for you to do anything, because the real world isn't always going to make you realize that. The real world isn't always going to tell you that. Some people are going to make you feel like because you have a disability, you can't do it. That is not true. And it's up to you to fully believe that. Going to school with disabilities, that's also been a challenge. Just like living with disabilities. Living with disabilities, yes, is a bit harder, but going to school has its challenges. Going back to living real quick, it wasn't easy when it came to family stuff either. When it came to family things, I have a great family, and while we may not always get along, when it comes to my disabilities, I'm lucky enough to have a very great support system of people around me who have always had my back and always tried to push me to better myself if I wasn't trying to push myself to better myself. When I was, let me see, about 6 years old, maybe somewhere a bit before that, I was in public school for kindergarten and first grade, and it wasn't easy at all because I also have something known as a shunt. And for those of you who don't know what a VP shunt is, a VP shunt is a device that is in your head. It can be in other places, but for me personally, it's in my head. And what it's supposed to do, this is how we ended up fixing everything that happened with the surgery or with the problem that made me visually impaired, excuse me. But with the VP shunt, what that's supposed to do is it goes from your head, in my case, and there's a tube that drains all the way down into my stomach. And what that's supposed to do is that's supposed to drain any fluid buildup in your head so it doesn't just stay there. Because if it does just stay there, well, then that can cause a lot of things. That can cause very bad headaches. And for those of you who have migraines, you know what that's like. But when it's something due to the shunt causing it or something due to, something that you would need the shunt for, it's a lot worse because even if medicine does help it get better, those aren't going to go away until you solve the problem. The fluid buildup can also cause eye pains, a bunch of other things. And when that fluid has nowhere to go, obviously it can start messing stuff up. So the shunt takes care of that problem. Does it take care of that problem 24/7? Absolutely not. I've had many surgeries over the course of my life. I'm only 21 going on 22 and I've had over 50 surgeries. And no, that is not a flex. Because I wish I didn't have to say that. But all of those surgeries were necessary because a lot of them were to either fix the shunt when it would malfunction or to correct something that the shunt couldn't correct at the time. So the shunt is there, like I said, to take care of the fluid problem, which is the reason I became visually impaired. And due to the shunt being there, we have to be very careful not to mess it up. So in order to not mess it up, a lot of times there were certain things I couldn't do in public school that other people could. For instance, we didn't have a grass field in public school. So when all the other kids would be running around and when all the other kids would be having fun playing and all that during recess, I would be sitting at a corner listening to my DVD player and just watching movies, watching Clash of the Titans, watching Percy Jackson, the original Clash of the Titans, 1981 to be exact. I believe 1981, 1989, it's one of those two. But Clash of Titans, Percy Jackson, all the stuff that in a way made this channel possible right now, I would be sitting there just watching that because I couldn't run around. Because God forbid I fall and hit my head too hard or hit my head at all on the concrete floor. Now we might have to go to the hospital to get something checked. So between that and between me always being a sensitive, emotional kid, due to that, a lot of times if my friends or people around me got in trouble, I would feel really bad and all that. So, to end up avoiding this, or not really avoid it, but to like change the scenery of where I was at, we ended up, me and my parents, taking me out of that school. We ended up after first grade getting me into a different school, which is where I met a lot of the people that you guys know on this channel now, such as Mikkel. Um, Occasionally, whenever she used to come on this channel, I think mainly for live streams and like maybe a few videos, but Selena, uh, I believe Angelique was on here once. I honestly don't remember. But regardless, a lot of those people, and even the people that didn't go to that school, like Jenna Claywell and all these others, all of them I met because of the fact that I went to the New York Institute for Special Education, which was a place that was more suitable for my needs. It was a place that, even if it wasn't always great at accommodating for it, it was a place that would give you the accommodations for people who had visual impairments, hearing impairments, autism, all this other type of stuff. Because if you hear the name for special education, it's as it sounds. It's for people who need a different type of learning than public schools can give. So when I went there, I sorry about that, folks. Not sure if I was still recording all that. I'll have to look back and see. But if you guys heard the knock, I had to take care of something real quick. So regardless, back to what I was saying though. When I went to the school for people like me with special needs, it wasn't always easy, but it did get a lot. It did get a lot better because I started, you know, learning more how to be in touch with who I am as a person with special needs. And I started, getting the things I needed, such as mobility, such as in elementary school, a person like a hearing teacher who was able to help me with my hearing problems when they started. I was able to get help for a lot of these things, and I do know that unfortunately not everyone is always able to get that. And some people like that because some people may not always like going to a special needs school because, as I said, they're not always as accommodating as they can be. But I am lucky enough to have also met a lot of people that I wouldn't have been able to meet if I hadn't gone to the special needs place, because then I wouldn't have gotten introduced to any of these choirs or anything like that that were made for people like me who, while we have ways of trying to get around it, we still have to use certain things in order to get stuff out there. And these choirs, I don't want to say I think were really made for people with special needs, but they were made, some of them were made for, people who are visually impaired and a lot of that. So it introduced me to a community that, while it's not always great, it's a community that I personally can connect to. So going to schooling when it came to special needs, again, not always easy, but it did help a lot in the long run. And it gave me something to talk about when I got older, for times like now where I'm in front of you on, your phone screen or whatever you're using to listen to this, talking to you about how just because, again, you have disabilities does not make you disabled. Just because you have disabilities, again, does not mean that you can't do things for yourself. Just because you have disabilities, again, does not mean that you are not someone who should be listened to. Just because you have disabilities does not mean that you are not still human and a person just like everyone else. Because you are. And me, I would like people to know that. I would like you to be able to tell people that if you're someone like me. Working with disabilities. Now, that's not always easy either, but there is one great thing about working with disabilities that everyone should know. Just like when it comes to going to school for people with disabilities, and again, so lucky that I went to a school that accommodated that, because a lot of people, when it comes to how they teach, aren't always used to having to work with people who have disabilities. So even if they shouldn't, they might start doing a lot of stuff like, you know, discriminating against you because of your disability or excluding you because of your disability. Well, here's the great thing. When it comes to jobs, due to an act that was made specifically to make sure that does not happen, you are not allowed to not be hired because you have a disability. The Disabilities Act, I forget what it's entirely called, but due to that, people cannot say they will not hire you specifically because you have a disability. Now, is this always around? No. But I'm glad it is around now. Because that means if you're visually impaired, if you're hearing impaired, if you have any type of disability, but you're still able to do the job, they cannot tell you no if you prove that to them. And if they do, there's ways you can get around it. So working isn't always easy. Because let's say, even then, right? Let's say you'll get hired. But let's say maybe the job is still taxing. It's still not that great. It's still, hard for you to do. Okay. But even if they don't have the tools to get around it, you can always then try to ask for your accommodations. And you can talk to them to get the accommodations you need. Because believe me, even if a lot of people don't have it set up all the time, the accommodations are out there. You just have to ask for them. And you have to talk to the right people to help you get them. But they are out there. So while working with disabilities may not always be easy, there are jobs that can be done by people like us. There are jobs that will be done and have been done by people like us. And great example. A lot of people who ended up going into careers and ended up making things for people like us that weren't always around. Louis Braille literally invented Braille for people like us because he needed it. So now there's a whole code that some people call the secret code that you can read with your fingers in order to get through both school, and if you need to write down notes, you can write down notes in Braille to read at work. There are so many different things out there that can help you in school and in work. If you have a disability, you just need to find it. Is it easy? No. But that doesn't mean you can't make it easy. Bonding with disabilities isn't always easy, hence pretty much everything I've been saying, but it's not impossible. Now, I will say this, it does make it a bit harder because when you can't see, a lot of times you have to go off of what you hear. And for people like me, that's exactly what I have to do. And it's not always easy because then sometimes you can end up getting into fights with people because maybe if you ask a certain type of question and they answer you a certain way, your takeaway might be, what did I do? Are you angry? Or did I make you uncomfortable with that question? When maybe that wasn't the case, but that's what you heard in their voice. So that's all you have to go off of. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Sometimes it just takes the right person to talk to in order to make that bond happen. Because believe me, I have a few close friends, even if it's not plenty. I have a few close friends, and that's because of the fact that we bonded over the fact that we have disabilities, over the fact that, we've grown up the same way almost, over the fact that a lot of things that have happened to us are pretty similar. So even if you can't see people, and yes, a lot of people will use that to their advantage, there aren't always going to be nice people out there. Some people, from what I've been told, when they know I can't see, will start doing things, and it has happened actually where I've heard it personally, where right when I tell them I can't see, or if they see the cane and know that I can't see, they'll start, doing the whole, how many fingers am I holding up? And yes, I'm just gonna say it to you now. Maybe not everyone is like this, but for people like me, that does tend to get on our nerves a bit when that constantly happens. Are we okay with explaining, why that's not okay to do? Yeah, but sometimes it does get annoying. Although sometimes us as, people who are blind and all that, we will sometimes even, jokingly say that to each other because we all know what it feels like to go through that. So again, we bond over that. Bonding isn't always easy, but a lot of things in life are not easy. The only difference is not everyone has disabilities. So when you have disabilities, that adds another challenge on to the fact that it's already difficult. But that doesn't make it impossible, and it never will. So, do you know what it's like to live through life with having disabilities of any kind? Well, even if you don't, now you do, in a way. Because in your own way, if you listen to this whole thing, you listened to one person's experience and one person's experience of other people's experiences having disabilities. Here's what I would like for you to take away. If you meet someone with disabilities, if you've never met anyone with disabilities, well, you'll know this for when you do now. Treat them the same way you treat anyone else. They're human just like you. And they can do exactly what you can do. But it's up to you to give them that chance to prove that to you. Because if they can't prove that to you, well then how are you ever going to know whether or not they can do what you can do? If you don't give them the chance, they're never going to be able to show it. So don't just assume. Ask questions. Have a conversation. Try to understand. Get a better understanding of who they are and let them prove to you who they are, even with the disabilities. Because having disabilities never makes you disabled entirely, and having disabilities does not make you any less human. Having disabilities is hard, yes, but overall, all it is another challenge to overcome. And if you can overcome that challenge, especially in your own personal life of having disabilities, well then hey, that also means you can overcome anything else life throws at you.